Hola a todos, mi nombre es Diego Lacerna y hoy estamos acá en la Universidad de MIT, en Boston, en Estados Unidos, arrancando un proyecto nuevo que vamos a hacer con varios compañeros. La idea es acercarnos a algunos de los profesores, de los estudiantes, de los expertos, a los que tenemos acceso acá para poder ampliar un poco el debate sobre temas urbanos en Bogotá. Entonces hoy vamos a arrancar con nuestra primera entrevista.
Buenos días a todos, mi nombre es Carlos Felipe Reyes. La entrevista hoy es a Larry Susskind, que es profesor de negociaciones de MIT en temas urbanos. La idea es explorar nuevas formas de ver el problema de la reserva Van der Hammen y el desarrollo futuro de Bogotá, tratando de buscar distintas aproximaciones al problema de las que se han discutido hasta el momento.
In other parallel situations, the first thing that would happen is people would inventory the ecosystem services provided by this area. It's not just an environmental area. You have to look at all of the functions that the ecology in this area provides and enumerate them. So, for example, if this is a holding area for certain kinds of groundwater, and then that groundwater feeds other groundwater, then you would say this area of land provides an ecosystem service of groundwater storage. If there are certain species that that need this area as a habitat to survive and have no other area, you would say habitat support is an ecosystem service provided in this area. So if I could enumerate the different services, it's possible to talk about the value of the benefits that go with those ecosystem services. And then we would say, well, if we eliminate those ecosystem services, then there are a series of short-term and long-term costs, unless we can find another way to provide all those ecosystem services at roughly the same cost. I don't think the development is going to not move out even if you develop this. You can't concentrate all the development about such a big metropolis in one spot. There's development's going to move to these areas. So the question is, what are the ecosystem services that are currently provided in all of these areas, and how could they defend those services as more development moves out? And then if you could guess, I don't know if you can, but if you could guess how much more development is going to move to these outlying areas if this is not developed versus the amount that will move if this plan goes on this site, then you would say, well, that's this much more development. It takes these ecosystem services away or protects them, and now we can make a judgment. But the judgment, it's impossible to say, I want development here to protect these areas, because there's no guarantee that if I made this here, all of this isn't going to double in development anyway. And what's interesting is that the decision about this isn't in the hands of the same party. As you described it to me, all of these outlying areas are managed by completely different other actors. And if they want some more development, they're going to make it attractive for more development to come there. It's nothing to do with whether this is built or not. It's an independent issue. Talking about generally a way to use the market to value these ecosystem services. And the way to do that, one way to do that, is to use the idea of transferable development rights, TDR. So if I took this area, which some people think is very valuable, as open space and as green space, and has different ecosystem service functions within it, and I laid a grid over it, doesn't matter how big or how small, we can debate that, but each square in the grid is for sale, except you can't develop the place if you buy it. You take the development right for your square in the grid, and you go either back to downtown Bogota or to one of the outlying cities where they want development, and all of those places who want to participate in this reduce the density that is allowed to everybody under normal circumstances. They reduce it and say, if you want to go above this reduced density, show me your development rights. And you would have to decide how many squares in this area would be required to add 3 stories to an apartment building in downtown Bogota. How many squares from here would be required to build a shopping center of 2 stories instead of 1 story in one of these outlying areas. And what the developer who wants to build the tall building or the new shopping center pays for the development rights is entirely up to the market. All of this, in a sense, tells you what the value is of this green space, because it's a product of the value of keeping this open so that development densities can increase elsewhere.
Okay.
And if nobody buys it, then I've lost my argument that this is really, really valuable land for ecosystem reasons. Because some of the people that will buy these development rights will be environmental groups. They'll be not-for-profits. Some will be speculators. There'll be developers helping to protect the environment because they can't help themselves, because they want to buy those so they can speculate on more. But so somebody should file the case quickly, who has the money, and say, I'm filing this case, but I don't care to wait until the courts and all the appeals finish. I just want to get everybody working together to resolve this. But I think by filing the lawsuit, you'll see that your best alternative is to work this out rather than to have uncertainty for 5 years while we wait for all the appeals process in the courts. And the ideal is to have the court say, we're going to not even hear this for 6 months, but we encourage all the parties to get together. And the court is willing to name a mediator. This mediator is going to meet with all the obvious groups who care about this, not just the plaintiffs and the defendants in the case, but all the groups that care about this, and produce what we would call a stakeholder assessment. And based on 50, 100 interviews, the mediator would come back and say to the judge or to whoever was funding it, could be a foundation, could be a group of companies, these are the 25, 30 groups that probably need to be at the table. This is the agenda. This is the timetable. This is the budget they'll need for expert advice jointly, that's given jointly to the parties. And at that stage, if all the parties agree, then the actual process of mediation would begin. And then the mediator would sit with them and say, okay, the problem that the stakeholder assessment developed was, how do you get the benefits of the development that the mayor wants of this area without the costs? That's the problem. And someone would say, well, all of these environmental benefits can only be provided by protecting this area. And someone else would say, no, you can have some of the environmental benefits by developing some of this area. And someone else would say, well, you know, if we moved future development partly here, maybe we could make a new open area over here, and we could buy that and protect that. Whatever it was, that would be the problem the group would have to work on and come to some agreement on. And we know that if you have the right parties, with a timetable that they've agreed to, with the mediator they've agreed to, working to solve the problem. The problem is not, is it right or wrong to build here or not? It's how do we get all the benefits without the costs, the ecological benefits, the societal benefits, the benefits to the landholders in terms of return on their property, without the costs, with the right parties who were jointly involved in designing the process, with a neutral, professional neutral that they could trust, could in 3 months, 6 months, produce a way of solving the problem. and then that might need to be put to a vote. But the key is somebody has to talk with all the parties to see what the process should look like and engage them in designing the process, the agenda, the work plan, the timetable, the ground rules. And then when it proceeds, it's not a government thing, which people think is just supposed to come up with the right answer for the government. It's a process of consensus building and joint fact-finding, and you can predict what the result will be.
Okay, well, thank you very much.